Hello, and welcome to the Coaches Corner, brought to you by the Endurance Lab, where the coaches from the lab recap the week and answer a couple of your questions from the forum. My name's Jason Flores, one of your Endurance Lab coaches, and I'm joined by Coach Taya Freestead and Ian Murray today. All right, let's just jump straight into the action here, and we're going to find out kind of what our lab had this week and kind of what was going on. We're going to start with Ian with the strength and multisport side. So Ian, tell us, why are we so sore this week?
Well, Jason, on the multi-sport side, we're pretty sore because we had a pretty brutal run workout. It was 5 by 1 mile on short rest. This is targeting obviously our long course athletes who have to get off the bike and get at it. And now this isn't 1 mile that any 1 mile will break you. It was a series of them with very little rest in between. So it simulates that you're already tired, and now we're pushing you into a whole new pain area. So it was definitely a very good, hard effort. And I think a lot of people really liked that one. I'm sure. I know I like that one. It's one of my favorite workouts. Then on the swimming side, our key workout of the week was it's an 800 followed by a 400 followed by 4 by 100. And you're progressively going harder through it. And by the end of it, I tell you, I did that one on Tuesday. And by the end of it, I was pretty smoked. But I did set PRs, this year PRs for 800, 400, and 2 of my 100s. So I was pretty happy with it, but it's definitely one of those that we've been building up for it with a lot of other of our harder workouts.
That's what I was going to ask. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And it's one of those that we've been building up for a few weeks of really to be able to attack this one workout, because this is very much of a simulation, race simulation, as far as having to push a little bit harder at the back of it if you need to. Usually that's just to kind of clear some space to be able to get out cleanly. And finish that swim off strong. And if you're doing an ocean swim, sometimes you have to really push that last 100 or 200 meters to get through the break. That can be a little bit challenging. As far as our strength side of the house, though, we had our big one this week was a 2 by Tabata.
Right.
And it's really not in and of itself is just horrible workout. When you look at it on paper, a lot of people go, oh, that's not bad. But then all of a sudden it just grinds you down.
Yeah.
It just pulverizes you a little bit because and you don't end it completely just gas like you were doing 800-pound squats, but you just physically spent, which is the idea of this one. Is a good 20-minute where you physically spent. You can recover quick, but you get a lot of those stabilizing muscle workouts, which Drew was talking about in the endurance lab this week. And that's the stuff that wears you down a little bit, and those are the muscles we really need to develop for those longer races. So it definitely is a good one this week. I like that one.
Right. As far as the runs are concerned, and you guys have been building up for kind of PRs, as we get into like the 6th, the 7th, the 8th week here, will riders and runners here in the multi-sport side of things expect to reach out to get to this level of where they're getting some PRs on some of the workouts, or is it something that kind of waiting for it all to culminate towards the end here?
So they may have been able to make a PR or hit a PR on one of the miles, but that really wasn't the goal. What we're looking through here is as we get through week 8, that 8 by 800, that's where it's really going to shine. That 8 by 800 is one of our tests we would do for someone who's a training for a marathon or half marathon. And if you can hit those 800s, and if you can go faster, it's even great. But if you can hit them all on target with the targeted rest, which isn't a whole lot, and it's a good high target pace, by the way, that'll be a big thing, because most people can get through 4, and then a lot of people can get through 6. But it becomes very difficult to get through 8, and so that's where we're really going to see that big jump. I think from all of our building that we've been doing is that 8 by 800 on the Monday of week 8.
Absolutely. Okay, just trying to get an understanding there, but yeah, definitely coming. It sounds like all the fitness is coming around for those runners and those swimmers as well. All right, so on the cycling side of the house, we had a really interesting and kind of talked about workout. I actually really enjoyed it. I did it outdoors. Just to kind of see how it would kind of fall in line, but definitely some good workouts. So Taya, on the cycling side, what kind of exciting workouts do we have this week in the lab?
So just before we jumped on that, quick comment on the strength side from what Ian said. If you find yourself traveling for work or otherwise and missing 2 days on the bike during a given week, look for these strength workouts that have leg work, such as the one we had this week for the Tabatas. the ones that you do, the squats and the jump squats, because those are really good to do when you're away to keep those muscles fired up, the same ones that you would use on the bike. So just as an observation.
A lot of people like butt crusher.
Oh, I remember that one. I don't think is that out for everyone yet?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's an exciting one.
So going into then this week's bike workouts, this was a tough week. We had tough workouts, and remember that this week followed another hard week. So this is something that, you're carrying a little bit of fatigue already from the prior week and into this week, which is by design, of course. It's meant to push you a little bit further. So we had the SST, Sweet Spot Waterfall. That one was a lot of time in sweet spot. It was long, but it was solid work there. So with very little breaks in between to keep that, trick your mind into thinking and your body into thinking, actually trick your body into thinking you're still working continuously without a break, but your mind gets that minute break in between. So good workout there. The threshold mix, which was, again, at the end of the day, 4x10, averaging 90% in sweet spot, but lots of changes up and down throughout the workout. This one I led this week in the module in Zwift with a group workout. Everybody seems to really like that one. And the favorite that we got a lot of comments on in the forum was the race accelerations.
Yeah. Very
tough workout. This one is really one that kills you because you start so hard. You start the 30 seconds at 140% of FTP. Then you have to hold 120% for a minute and a half afterwards. So that alone is a leg burner. And then we ask you to hold threshold for 3 minutes and jump out of the saddle and go all out for 10 seconds. So this is really that situation when you see yourself in a race having to attack or at the end. And it's great training for being able to put down power on tired legs and on top of a very hard floor, meaning you are at 95% to 100 of FTP, and then you still have to get up and put down the power. So great job, everyone. We still have to come here on the weekend, the longer tempo ride with some surges at low cadence, which is going to be a great workout for closing out this week.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I did get a chance to try some of the race accelerations at a local group ride. And I think what it does is bring perspective to how little it actually it takes wattage wise, now that a lot of us are paying attention to this, to kind of get away from the group that you're with. A lot of times people feel like it needs to be an all out 500, 600, 7 watt difference, but really it's just a matter of getting above the wattage that everybody is riding and for a good extended amount of time. So I was able to kind of try this by pushing that number at that first part and getting away. And then as I sat down and as I put in that sweet spot effort a couple times as the group is like 30, 40 people end up bringing me back, but they're like, oh my God, you're ripping my legs off. But in fact, once you make that initial get away and that jump away, that's where everyone's having to respond to even higher wattages than you're putting out. And that's why this is so important. Not so much as a response to somebody else going, but if in fact you are trying to get yourself some separation, that's what this essentially simulates. So really great workout all across the board. Go ahead, Ian.
And on that, I think that's what's really important is I think people get the misconception that when you do these breaks in a race that you're just literally riding people off your wheel.
Yeah.
That is not how it works at all. I mean, unless you were like Fabian Cancellara racing against children, then you just ride them off the wheel. But in an average race, it's an attack, and then it's the decision of the group, do we chase or not?
Exactly.
And that's what that big attack, or not even, and it's not an all out, you're getting at that gap. So that big move, and then you're going to ride at a sustainable, hard but sustainable pace to see if they're going to chase you or not. And if they don't chase, now you're solidifying that gap, then you may have to hit that one more time with that, what we have in that big effort at the end. That might solidify the deal or that's that final sprint to win. But, and I think that's where people make that mistake. They think they have to go out at their 1 minute or 5 minute power max all out to get away. is if you're racing with numbers, if it's more than 2 or 3 people that you're against, you're never going to get away with that because 20 people are going to chase you down.
No matter what.
They're always going to chase you down every time, no matter what, unless you're just that much stronger. And then if that's the case, then you don't really need to worry about it. You're just stronger than they are.
Yeah. So I think just realizing that what type of level of effort it takes is important. And that's what this workout does. It allows you to not need to know that it takes 200% for 30 seconds and then you completely can't hold threshold. And that's where it's really important to hit those targets, especially at the beginning of these workouts. So now that with that information, heading back to take a look at this workout or maybe doing it again at some other point could be very, very useful. So excellent. All right. Before we head over to hot topics in the lab, I wanted to give you a little bit more information about this podcast because today it's actually brought to us by the coaches of the Endurance Lab, where you can train smart, learn more, and get results. The labs here, if it's your first time here and listening to us talk, they're actually specifically designed to help you achieve your structured training goal with the group of cyclists or triathletes working towards similar goals. In each lab, what you'll have is direct access to certified coaches, experts, and in various aspects of endurance training. You'll also learn from your own peers going through the same lab. You will have access to, and also have access to, an exclusive forum. So we use online training tools and cycling platforms that include Training Peaks, Zwift, and Trainer Road to help facilitate this group interaction all throughout the lab. So head over to endurancelab.fit now to see when the next lab begins. All right, let's jump over to hot topics in the lab. We're going to go ahead and start off with Taya. I know a lot of people have been getting outdoors, and we're going to talk a little bit about racing and some tips, and then we can jump from there. So Taya, here we go.
We had a couple of people already doing trainer type races, training races, but also giving a shot at their first race of the season or even first race ever. So it would be a good time to talk about some of the tips and things to keep in mind as you plan to race. We have been spending here in the Northern Hemisphere long months on the trainer. So needless to say, we need to get out there and dust off the skills as long as there's no snow on the ground and try, or if there's snow, maybe you like riding in the snow. You have a fat bike or something. Dust off your skills, your handling skills, your pack riding skills. Get with a group, go out there, just getting back to that feel. It's really all in there, right? You just need to go out and start doing it again. Get your bike checked if you use a different bike on the trainer versus outdoors, especially. Make sure things are all in check, tuned up, cleaned up, and ready to go outside. Now, when you plan your race, and this could be your first time race, or it could be your first time doing a certain kind of race, or it's not the first time, but you haven't raced for a year because you've been indoors. So, of course, the training indoors is meant to simulate the demands of racing, and we have that in the lab and the workouts that we do. But when you then start to dust off your skills, go outdoors and simulate some of those things. Do some sprinting outside, navigate the turns, do the cornering, and really go, the downhills. All of those skills, go out there and practice those before you have to do them on the race. Once you decide the race you're going to do, preview the course if you can. If it's close by, just go out there, write a course ahead of time. If you cannot do that, you'll be surprised of how many local races are on YouTube. A lot of people have their cameras on their bikes and they post those videos on. I've been watching those quite a bit, actually. But decide where you're going to warm up to. You're going to need to warm up. So as you preview the course, or as you familiarize yourself with the course, with information you can find online, see when the event starts and see if you're going to have a place to warm up. Are you going to be able to ride the course as a warm-up? That's another option. Or are you going to have to find somewhere else? Or another option is even bringing a trainer into the parking lot. Those little portable trainers that you might have seen people warming up next to their cars before a race. So you plan on 30 to 40 minutes of warm-up. Know what the last K of the race is like in terms of terrain. So if you cannot ride the course, at least get to the finish line. See if you can ride in 1K and see, does it end in a hill? Even if you can see the file online ahead of time, once you get there, see if you can take a peek, because there might be something that you don't realize at the end, and so you're prepared for that finish. Obviously, check the weather forecast ahead of time.
Sorry, one thing to add on that too is as well as knowing the terrain, know the features of the road. So I know Jason has experience with this. In California, they have those bot dots. And if you're coming out of a turn in the last K of a race or the last K of a race, you don't want to be rolling through a corner at max speed hitting one of those. So just know the physical layout of the end of the race too.
Yeah, so if you have an opportunity to roll through the course, it's definitely important. Good thing about most races, if they are a circuit or a crit on those side of things, or their laps, you'll get a chance to kind of know the last K or the last bit, because you would have ridden it several times if in fact it is laps, but definitely super important.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great points there. Check the weather forecast. You should have an idea of the time of the year, right, and what the weather is supposed to be like. But it's good to practice in the conditions if you can. Have a race plan. So when you talk about having a race plan, we can divide that in two buckets. We can talk about the weather. We can talk about how you're going to plan your actual race, and then your food and hydration. So the first one, checking the weather. It's important to see, as the day approaches, the conditions also of the winds. Are you going to have crosswinds? Are you going to have headwinds? Where on the course are those winds going to be? So you can be prepared. Then planning for your power and your performance on the day of. Again, it's not like everything is going to go according to plan in terms of, oh, I know I'm going to race at a certain power for this period and another power for another period, but you should have an idea of what you are able to do or what you want to do, and be realistic. Know your limits. If you are the kind of person who is not very good at descending, don't go out and go crazy on that descent the day of the race. Make sure it's something that you have trained to do and you're used to doing.
Yeah, on that, Taya, there's a couple different things too to consider. If you're doing a road race or a crit, you can have a plan in mind, but the plan's going to be dictated a lot of times by the race, unless you have enough people on your team to dictate the actual race. So you have to watch your numbers to make sure you're not doing anything stupid. But don't try and stick to a plan. If the group goes and you're like, well, sorry, I can only hold 185 watts for this period of the race. If the group's going, you got to stay with the group.
Right.
So you definitely want to take that. But when you're looking at time trials or fondos or things that are more of an individualized event, then you definitely can take a look at that. One of the tools I use is Best Bike Split. Jason's used it. I used it with Jason, Justin Wagner as well, and a couple other people. And I use it when I do my tries to kind of give me an idea of, hey, at this point in the race, it specifically tells me to use this amount of power. Well, I don't always follow it 100%. I try to stick real close to that. And it keeps me from going out at 750 watts in the first 2 miles of a 56-mile ride, and keeps me in check. So later on, I know I'm good to go for the run.
750 watts for 2 minutes. That sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't do it. I was realizing a little bit, but I mean, I could probably do it for like 90 seconds, but no big deal. Well, no, but just actually using that as a good example, I did that at Chattanooga at 70.3 Worlds this year. I had it planned out. And I ended up going the first hour. I was at my normalized power for the first hour of the race was 96% of FTP, because I was climbing. So it had a huge climb up Lookout Mountain. And so you guys know me, I just hammer up the climb, but I had it planned that way. I knew I could recover, because later in the race on the flat sections and downhill, I was pushing much, much lower wattage to recover for the run. And that's what I planned to do. And I used Best Bike Split to help me with that. And it worked out great. And I still ended up with I just missed an hour 30 for the half marathon. I was like an hour 30:08 for the half marathon on the run afterwards. So I would say I had my legs underneath me pretty solidly.
Yeah. And I think under the category of race plan, with what Ian was talking about, I guess to speak a little bit on the user side, having an idea of how much you actually need to put in to get up and over little rollers or on longer climbs, and putting things in perspective was really useful. I used it during a 100K race, and it allowed me to know if I needed to really push myself to the front of a group, or if I felt the group was going too hard, but I was still in the middle of the group, because I knew what it would take for me to be able to roll over and still have enough energy to continue on. So having those targets and can be very, very useful during the planning purpose. And on the second point of that, as far as planning and warming up, a lot of times people will go out and they'll preview the course, which I think is great if it's a small course. Obviously, if it's 60 some odd miles, you're not going to go take a look at all of that. But if it's a circuit or something like that, definitely preview the course. But as far as warm up, separate that from your previewing of the course. And a lot of times, every single workout we hear here in the Endurance Lab has a very similar warm up. So use a warm up that you've used before. It may not be the one that we have for you, but whatever you choose and try beforehand, let's say you do before a Zwift race or whatever, something that will kind of check the boxes for you for warm up, I would say do that. I think the best warm ups that I see my athletes do in real life, especially for shorter races, typically to be on a trainer to get the wattage targets versus heart rate targets, because it's just so far off. Super important. So on the plan side of that, definitely planning a warm up and doing something that you've done before.
And if you're new to racing, keep it simple. I know there's a lot of talk about racing tactics, plans and attacks, etc. But really, unless you're very experienced and you have a team, etc., keep it simple. Yep. Focus on finishing that race. Be safe. Keep track of your front wheel. You're responsible for your front wheel. And plan for things to go wrong. You never know. It can go wrong with you. You might show up at the race and see that you forgot your shoes. I don't know, something like that might happen, or something goes wrong for somebody in the actual race in front of you. So if you're still learning to race, keep it simple, be safe.
Yeah.
And for Cat 5s, there's no such thing as team tactic.
Nothing.
So
even in fours. Even in fours.
So Cat 3. Cat 3 is where team tactics start to come into play.
You have to be on a team and with someone in order to work. Verbal agreements at the line do not count. So really, you are racing for yourself. And you know what? And that keep track of your front wheel. We tell so many riders in a group ride, if you take care of your front wheel and where you're putting it, everything else will take care of itself. We are in a really exciting time here locally. We have the Redlands Classic, which is a pretty big stage race that's coming up in a week. So a lot of the pros are actually here in our group rides, not wearing their kits. We have to figure out if they're here or not. They're just riding their team bikes, and they're hammering it. And it's super important especially when the paces go up, that you're making sure your front wheel is where it needs to be. That way everyone behind you can do the same, because everyone is trying to fit in this little tiny spot. And so really just making sure you're doing your job, and you can't really worry about everyone else getting out of the way. You need to put yourself where you're going to be safe. So
if they're speaking French or Italian, I'm going to guess they're the pros, Jason.
No, we don't get international pros. We get all the domestic guys. And anywhere from that to your local highlighters, or guys that think that they're really, really fast, especially our own Justin Wagner, who's coming down on Sunday. I'll be picking him up from the airport. So that's an exciting time.
Need some GoPro on that bike.
Yeah, we should, huh? I do have my cameras. Yeah, it's a lot, and Justin's got a lot on his mind, so it's been pretty crazy as he's getting ready for this race too. But don't worry, I'll be there to catch it all the agony, all the pain. I'll be there on the sidelines catching that all for everybody. So
awesome. So to close here, the topic of racing and getting ready for racing, we talked about dress rehearsal before here in the coach's corner, to try things in training that you're going to use in racing. So nothing is new in terms of food or hydration. Mm-hmm. And remember that getting ready for food and hydration starts days before. And this is where, if the race is a longer one, if it's a crit, shorter race, not so much. The days leading up to are not as important as they would be if you're doing a longer race. Having said that, the day of the race, make sure you eat 2 to 3 hours before. If it's a crit race, you can have a gel, for example, with caffeine right before the start because it's short. If it's a longer race, the recommendation is that you do not do that at the beginning. Save that for the last hour of the race. The arrive earlier than you think that you should be there, just so you have plenty of time for all the last minute things that could happen, including all the bathroom breaks that you might need ahead of time.
But don't get there 3 hours before the race. Don't get there 3 hours before the race if you don't need to. I know a lot of triathletes are like that. They'll say transition opens at 5:30. You'll see people will get there at 4:45. I'm like, dude, why? What are you doing? Yeah. You know, your race starts at 8:30. Transition's open from 5:30 to 7:30.
No.
You know.
Then by then you're tired and you're hungry again.
Yep.
I try to find that happy medium. I don't necessarily get there right at transition opening, but I also don't wait to the last minute because that's when panic sets.
Yeah, I think that's where planning comes into mind, and kind of if you are there an extended amount of time and you feel like you need to get the nerves out, it's just kind of stepwise. You're gonna get this ready, you're gonna get that ready. You're not gonna be like full kitted, ready to go, and it's like 2 hours before the race, since they're like you're just sitting around ready to party.
I've seen it. I've seen people in their wetsuit 90 minutes before a race starts. You do realize that's gonna get hot, right?
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah.
All right. Was there anything there? I know we were talking about, I think we hit it. Expecting things to go wrong, and just making sure you plan for those things.
I think one more thing is dress for the weather.
Yeah.
A lot of times you might think and this is the beauty of having the warm up at the beginning. You are able to shed layers if you need to before the race, so you know how you're going to feel. If you're already feeling hot, it's better to start the race feeling a little bit cold, because chances are you're going to warm up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it's definitely good to.
So that's actually a great point. You guys in the fondos, and we have it with the bigger, running races where you have a long time, maybe when you start in your corral before you actually hit the start line.
Exactly.
Like I did the Disney Marathon a few years ago, and I was up at the very front, but someone who was in the back, they had to get there around the same time I did. But they actually didn't start the race till an hour after I'd started it. In fact, I did the half marathon the day before, and I was finishing the half marathon when my wife was actually getting out the starting pen.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I mean, she actually saw me coming back through. So I had about a mile left of the half marathon getting out through the starting pen. So it's a long time. So there's a lot of things you can do. Like one of my favorite shirts that I wear to these kind of races is called a plastic bag, or we call it a bag plastique. It's a brand known as Hefty, and you can cut a hole for your head and a hole for your arms, or not if you don't want to tuck them in, and it'll keep you warm because it's plastic, it's insulating. And then as you come up to the start finish area or the start line, you take it off and throw it in the trash right by there, or throw it on the ground right by the start line, and it'll get collected up. And that helps keep you warm. It keeps the rain off you if there's a little bit of rain, because you don't want to start running with your sweatshirt and your Uggs on, and then you have to start stripping things off later on in the race.
I have done a video recording for a couple of my friends who did the OC marathon, and I do remember it was littered crazy at the start line with these sort of things. You'd never find any of this stuff at a cycling race, but I mean, definitely you would get banned from the area, but it does work. I mean, everyone had one. I mean, from the front corral all the way back to guys that were just going to be walking, everyone had something like this. But yeah, it's definitely really useful. So, and in those cold situations.
Yeah, $50 race losing an $85 fleece because you start off too hot.
Yeah. All right. We're going to actually slide on over to the feed zone. I know we've had Andrea Cullen here with us, giving us some great information. We've had this topic in the wings ready to go. We're going to talk a little bit about cramping, not just on the bike, but also for cycling and even for swimming for those who suffer from that. But specifically, we're going to be talking about exercise-associated muscle cramping. That is localized cramping to, let's say, your calf, your quad, or your hamstring. Previously, there has been a lot of ideas of kind of what are the causes. You ask somebody, hey, what is this caused by? A lot of times people will talk about dehydration status, we'll talk about electrolyte status. And as long as your regular days kind of leading up to the race have normal hydration, you're getting electrolytes in on a normal basis, and those levels are available during your exercise or during your race, it appears at this time, as far as science can tell us, that it doesn't appear that nutrition immediately has much to do with the localized cramping of during exercise. And the reason why is if in fact dehydration or an electrolyte deficit immediately was affecting your cramp, you wouldn't actually have a localized cramp. You'd actually have your whole body cramp, because electrolytes and dehydration are something that affects all the muscles in the body. So it's not that your calf doesn't have enough electrolytes. If in fact it was being the cause, it would be something that the whole body would have trouble transmitting muscular strength or being able to push the pedals or keep you moving forward. So current observational studies that have been developing around this topic, exercise-associated cramping, have now started to emerge, talking about an aggressive pacing strategy being a factor, racing at a higher intensity than you had trained, and riding longer than you had trained for as well. So if you go back to the times where you may have experienced cramping, thinking about these things, did you go out harder? Did you go out at a higher intensity than you intended to, for example, at the beginning of a race? Or are you have gone longer, or a combination of these three where it created the perfect storm where you've done all the things that you have normally done, but you've run into this issue of cramping? So there's been some other nutritional ways that have been looked at in order to prevent cramping. So specifically, a lot of times you'll hear, you need to drink this, you need to eat that, you need to have, bring this into the body. I think for normal levels of hydration, hydration and electrolyte levels throughout your rides and through your workouts, we can get that level in. But when we need something that needs to kind of trigger or make a change that allows us to kind of get ourselves out of that hole, some of the things in the science are showing that there's a reflex that's actually triggered in the mouth or the upper esophagus, towards the upper part of your mouth, that you could actually trigger with a vinegar or an acidic acid type taste that will allow you to be able to distract the neuromuscular parts of the body and bring that cramp and get it to fire back in its normal pattern. Because essentially that is the root of what's going on. Essentially the muscle is not firing at the correct kind of on and off pattern, and essentially the muscle gets tightened up. And so because of the strong stimulation in the nervous system in the mouth, it essentially reduces the activity to other parts of the body. And so the explanation and the evidence is starting to support this practice. A lot of times people talk about pickle juice and they think it's because it's salty, but in fact, it's not that it's salty, but it's that vinegar taste that's really, really kind of making this come together and work, because the nervous system has to relax the other nerves in the body, and the contraction can help reduce the cramp. I've used this several times on simulation. I've given it out to riders that are in our groups trying this as well, that were suffering from the same sort of thing. And you're starting to see products come out on the market that have the same sort of feel. It may be cayenne pepper, it could be pickle, it could be something of very, very sharp tasting that allows us to get this nervous system kind of switched over. So something to kind of look at. I'll post a link to a full article from Cycling Tips where a lot of this information came from the original In the Feed Zone. And I'll also post the original talk. But think about it. Think about the last time this happened to you. Think about the situation and take a look and see if this is something that you can have in your bag. Something as simple as a couple tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, which is what I use, or some of these products that are on the market, could be really useful if it could take you out of cramping. At the very earliest inkling, I go ahead and take a shot's worth, and I carry about 2 or 3 shots. And it's a really small vial that I carry. It's kind of golden color, so people really think it's really odd that I'm carrying a bottle of this. It's in but it works. And so give it a try. You could try it on the bike when you're training. Try it out on a group ride and see. and then bring your little your golden colored flask that will save you the next time you the next time you have cramps.
Nobody will drink it.
With the added benefit of tricking everybody into thinking you're getting some superpowers as you drink it.
Exactly. Yeah, I got one of those hammer flasks, Ian, that I know a lot of try guys use. Usually put a gel in it. It's kind of really soft. Yeah, that works really well for this. So, but yeah, so really interesting.
Yeah, so I've had this kind of stuff, and I've tried one of the products on the market. But I will tell you that some of and this is why I know that the whole concept of cramping is still an undefined study, because when I raced Miami Man in November, the day before the race, my left calf felt tweaky. You just kind of feel like it's tweaky. And I couldn't quite place it. And I knew I maybe hadn't hydrated because I'd had to travel for work the week before. And I actually took one of the product. I hit the shot before I got in the water. And it didn't prevent it. I think it mitigated a little bit, but my left calf cramped up like crazy in the second lap of the swim. And I definitely was not going out at a really high intensity. In fact, I was probably about a normal pacing I'd been doing for the swim.
Yeah.
But oh man, it cramped up and it was something just horrid. I had to flip over my back for a minute and was like, doing the weird backstroke of trying not to drown. But unfortunately, I couldn't carry another one with me on the swim.
I also wonder if some people are more prone to it than others. Knock on wood, I rarely cramp. I think I probably can count 3 times in my whole life that I had cramps.
I sometimes cramp towards the end of the bike on a really long try. But, when you're pushing for 5 hours and then you have to dismount your bike quickly to go for a run, it kind of triggers, but then let's go.
Yeah, and I think when you change positions, like drastically, like when you're making those moves, like for example, we had a rider that normally doesn't have issues with this, but essentially was doing a road race, and when the road went up and they were trying to respond, they actually stood up and was standing for an extended amount of time, and essentially had experienced a cramp that they had never really had experienced. And it could be from, maybe not doing, standing drills, or having that effort, or just that lull before the climb, then all of a sudden putting this huge effort to stand up. And so, it's just perfect storm. And it's just a matter of, you need to making sure that our body can go through that full range of mobility to be able to do that thing, to have that as a base, and then also have these, these things as an understanding. All right, so we've got a little bit to go here. We're going to run over to Ian on the multi-sport side to talk a little bit about running zones, heart rate versus pace versus power. So Ian, take it away.
Yeah, so there's been some questions in the lab this week about how we pace ourselves. And running's an oddball because there is no such thing as a direct force power meter for running.
Yeah,
there just isn't. Everything that's out there in the market is an algorithmic based system for power. And so, you take that for what it is. But for me, I look at anything that's giving you consistent numbers. Okay, you can use that as a tool. Same with heart rate. Heart rate and pace are both an issue, because if you set your pacing zones off of a flat track, well, that's not very useful if you're running up hills, because the paces don't equate. And then heart rate, likewise, the issues we've talked about before with heart rate, where there's a heart rate lag, there's a lot of other factors that depend on it. You might be running the same pace, but over an hour and a half, your heart rate's going to creep up. Your body dehydrates, your blood volume gets a little thicker. So all of those things that go into it make running a little bit more challenging as far as calling your zones and your paces than cycling. One of the things I do like to do is I do like to test by using 8-minute efforts, 5K or 10K, because I generally view 10K as long enough of a distance that's going to push you past your basic anaerobic zones, obviously, unless you're some kind of Kenyan or Gwen Jorgensen. But, so you're going to have to go anywhere between most people between 35 and 45 minutes or longer. So you can get a good idea of how your body's going to react. The 5K, because it's a much harder pace, but I really don't like I'll use 5K for most people, but I think it's not a very good measure for a really fast, because a really fast runner is still, you're talking 17, 16, 15 minutes. They're they're pushing a little different energy system than an average runner. And then the 8-minute ones are sometimes good just to see how high you can get that heart rate. And you can really see where that peak, where that is, where your heart rate hits a peak and then your pace will drop off pretty substantially. You know, while it may not look substantial as far as the numbers go on the track, when you really break it down, if you're doing 8 minutes and you peak out at a 5:20 mile pace with this heart rate, and then it drops off to a 5:40, okay, you know that was pretty much your max threshold or max point sustain, or that you can hit. It's kind of like that 1 minute or 5-second max power type thing on the bike. But it's a very much of a personal thing. So what I usually like to do with people is we'll do some testing to kind of create ceiling. So for a runner who's going to be running a half marathon or a marathon or a 10K, we'll put a heart rate ceiling out there for them for their training, their long runs, or for up to a specific point in the run. Because generally I found when I cap someone on a heart rate, I can keep that person controlled. I can keep that person from going out too fast. I can keep them fresh enough where at the end of it, there's no cap on anything in the last few miles of a race. You're going. So if you're gassed, you're gassed. If you've gotten a tank, you've gotten a tank, and that's what you hammered out with. So I try to set things up that way as much more of a ceiling, no floor, and trying to stay somewhere in, near that, but not going near the ceiling, let their body naturally get there. If that kind of makes sense for the people who are new to the running world. And then, like I said, you have to take weather and terrain into effect. One of the things that a lot of the algorithmic power meters don't take into effect is terrain. So they're measuring your power, but then they're also trying to measure your pace. And so I never use my running power meter for pace. I use GPS, because I found that while it does account for going uphill in the power, it doesn't necessarily account for the terrain when it's creating creating my pace on the watch, because it's measuring my steps based on my average distance per step. Well, when I hit different terrain, my stride changes a little bit, so it won't accurately reflect my actual pace. So that's why I use the GPS, and I don't use the algorithmic power meters or the distance pods for anything other than just power. Now, the most important thing I wanted to talk about today is, based on these questions people were asking about zones and how we establish our zones. What I kind of came up with on my own was my own zone methodology, and they morph. So there's no one zone as far as you can say for a whole race. I mean, you can do it, but if you're racing hard, zones are going to morph, because you obviously can't start out in the hardest zone at a 10K, because you just can't do it. So the way I broke it down is there's 6 zones, 0 through 5. I call 0 is my all-day conversational pace. That's like when you're going out with Ryland, you're going to jog and Ryland's going to ride his bike now, and you're just going to talk. Or you're out with your friend who's got some issues they got to work through. So you can work through that. Or, it's a walk or a slow jog. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're out it's your friend who's just new to running and you're zone number 1 is where our actual first training zone. That's an easy pace. You can speak in sentences. You won't lose your breath with 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. You probably can't do a Shakespearean soliloquy. That's probably not going to happen. You'd be a little winded doing that, but you can definitely have that free flow back. Zone 2 is where we start getting to a little bit more. This is maybe your marathon or half marathon pace early on, or what it should be, I should say. You can speak in a complete sentence, but if you have to go to a compound sentence or multiple sentences, it's probably going to force you to be a little out of breath. So that's about where that zone 2 is. It's still easy. It's not hard. You can, like I said, get the whole sentence out, but you may need to take a quick pause and get your breath back underneath you if you went too long. Like I said, that's usually early in the half marathon. Zone 3 is what I would call moderate to moderate hard. You could do phrases, 3 to 5 word phrases, but probably not a complete sentence. Complete sentence would probably wind you. So we're talking your 5K to 10K early on this one. And when you get out the gate on the 5K, you can get some phrases out, but definitely not a sentence. As we move into zone 4, which is definitely hard, you're talking words. 1 or 2, max. Any more than that, and you're just gutted. This would be your 1 mile or 1K pace, or maybe the end of a 5K or 10K where you're really pushing. And this is important because a marathon your marathon pace in zone 2 may over time morph into zone 4. Even though your pace never changed, it's your perceived effort zone. It becomes zone 4. because you're just getting fatigued physically and emotionally and mentally. Now, zone 5 becomes guttural sound, pre-vomiting, not sustainable. That's like your closing sprint, a 400-meter effort. You're finishing out a really hard race, something like that. And literally the only thing that's going to be coming out of your mouth is if someone speaks to you, you can go, and that's about it. That's all that's coming out, because you're not physically capable of making any actual words. And most of it's just hard breath is the best you can. So that's where I kind of lay out my zones. And I try to lay it out for people in that way, because it's much easier to distinguish this than off of a heart rate or off of pace or off of power. And over time, you can kind of figure out, okay, I know when I'm running at 135 beats per minute, that's probably my easy, moderate, pace. I can speak no problem with that. So it's easy, moderate. I can carry on a conversation. When I'm starting to get up to the 150s, then I'm pushing to 170, maybe 160s, 4. And once I'm in the high 170s, I'm at 5. That's where that's my speed work. So you start kind of figuring these out and understanding when you're, regardless what your heart rate is saying or your power number is saying or your pace is, if you're supposed to be in that easy, moderate zone, if you can't speak in a sentence, you're going too fast. You're going too hard. So I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but in my mind, it works out that way real well. And I've had a couple of people that really like it, because it's not too scientific, obviously, but it does kind of put it into terms that most people can recognize when they're trying to lay out their zones. And like I said, these morph. So what might start as a zone 2 over time can become a zone 3 or zone 4, depending on how long you're going and how trained up you are.
Yeah, I think this definitely speaks to not only zones in running, but also in cycling, but things change over pace over time. So it's important to kind of put yourself in those positions and kind of ask yourself those honest questions, like, is this a pace that I can maintain for X amount of time? Can I sustain this, this run pace, this cycling power for a sustained part of time? So super important to kind of put words to how you feel and make notes, or we all track, whether it be on Training Peaks or on Strava, using those descriptions and that sort of thing to kind of make yourself a journal is super important.
Jason, is that there we go. I think one of the other things, Jason, is that we're having, when I'm in a race, for example, I was doing a marathon in Cocoa, Florida, and I could tell that one of the people next to me was in his apparent zone 3, maybe moving toward a 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured it was a good time to break it, because I knew, because he looked like he might have some closing speed, but he was suffering a little bit in the heat. And so when I came alongside him, and there's a small group of them, and I basically acted, I was in zone 1.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had to compose myself and force it. So I kind of made it look like I was in a zone 1 or 2, because I tried to carry on a small conversation with them and got them where they were starting to get winded. and then I attacked.
Yeah.
And I broke them off, and it helped, because at the end of the day, they probably had more closing speed than I did, but I broke them early at mile 8. So by mile 22, I was way up the road. There's no worries about closing speed.
I think in cycling, when you're outdoors, obviously really hard to be able to recognize those signs. We go more, I think, by body language.
Oh, yeah. But everyone's faking it, I feel like. When we're out on a group ride, everyone's faking it like they rode 60 miles already, but it's like 10 miles from 10 miles from the coffee shop. We're like, take a pull, dude. And he's like, like, go around. I'm like, you pull for like 3 seconds. I'm like, or you get hero pulls where people are pulling for like minutes at a time, and then they come off the front. I'm like, well, that's silly. You just went for 3 minutes. Of course you're going to be tired. You're done. You're silly. So you just get all of that acting.
Yeah, and people get, they're let's say they get to be known for doing these things pretty quickly. So watch out for that, because you're known. Oh, look at the person who never pulls is on the ride today.
Yeah. Between that and hero pools of just going forever and you're just getting used up. You're like, gosh, why is this person just on the front? Like, they can be out the back, like, pretty
soon.
Only
they want to work, right? No one else goes to
Exactly.
work. Mhm.
Oh, we've all had this, haven't we?
We're not going to
All
go
right.
there.
We won't go
Why,
there.
why are you not complaining about me doing all the pulling, Jason? You didn't seem to mind when I was working the whole time.
Oh man, no. Ian and I did a good amount of pulling for the local riders when we were here. So much so they were like, "Are they really going to stand for 40 minutes all the way up this climb?" Oh my god. Yeah, that was a fun interest. They still talk about it as being the hardest ride that they've done this year.
And I was on a borrowed bike that didn't fit.
Yeah, and for us it was just like a normal training day. We're like, oh,
Hey.
yeah, that's good. That's good. When your training is harder than your actual workout and rides, that's where you want to get to.
That's right.
All right, let's move over to Lab Rat of the Week. Taya, we've got some exciting news of two of our Odivas that really made a big break this last week.
Megan and Stephanie, they both decided to do their very first outdoor race together. So, and nevertheless, they decided it was going to be a crit, which can be very intimidating for a lot of people. So, yeah, they decided to go out and try a Tuesday night crit race in their town. It was 12 laps of about 3/4 of a mile each. And it was a hilly course. So half a lap downhill, the other half was uphill into the wind. And they had a blast. They, they were in the, what they called beginners group. I don't think they had it as Cat 4 or 5 per se, but I guess it's the same thing. And they learned a lot. They said that there was a group that broke away a couple laps in, and that was the front group. And they stayed together and worked at accelerating, resting, practicing good lines on the corners, braking, when to brake, how to accelerate out of the corners, braking before the corners, etc. So, and they had done, which is great too, if you're considering doing a crit for the first time, see if there are clinics. A lot of times there are practice crits or clinics that you can go to learn and know what to expect. So they had done a clinic before this, which they said was really helpful. But just great attitude in terms, and the right attitude really, going into their very first crit race, very first race outdoors ever, and learning from it, knowing that, they were in for having a good attitude towards what they expected from it. So great report. Thanks for sharing with everybody in the forum there. And of course, representing the Team ODZ as the Odivas in the race.
Absolutely. Definitely super inspiring. I think with the public races, like they're racing, which is like beginner, intermediate, or however they split it up, you're just going to get a hodgepodge of riders. And you get riders that are super strong that shouldn't really be in that category. And you'll get riders that will fall into your category. We both know that these ladies are quite strong in their own realm and have been doing a lot of training. I'm happy they were able to find a spot where they were able to work on things and get stronger together. And I think that's just great. So a great inspiration to everybody else here.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to throw out, for Stephanie and Megan doing this is great. I just want to make sure everyone's tracking that, if you go out and do a race like this, and this is one of your first races outdoors, if you go and you don't find that you can hang with the group like you can in the Zwift race, it's not necessarily because Zwift is different than real racing, but I will tell you there's much more stress involved in actually physically racing out on the road.
Yep.
The stress of positioning, of not running into riders in front of you, because in Zwift, you just ride through a rider. You don't have to go around them.
Exactly.
So positioning is important, but not as important. And, preventing yourself from crashing and not crashing other people out of the race. So there's a lot more stress that's involved in a regular race that will easily get you thrown out the back or spit out the back that wouldn't necessarily happen in a Zwift race. So if you don't get the results you want in the first few, that's okay. Expect that. Just understand that it's going to take time to get that comfort in the pack.
Great points. Great points from both of you. Going back to Jay Flo's point too, you divide up the group in watts per kilogram in a race like in Zwift. You don't have that in a Cat 4 or 5. I mean, you have everybody in there. And Ian's so right about all these other stressors and all these other things that affect the outcome. So great points there.
Yeah, you bring that sort of thing up, like at a group ride or a talk. People are like, "I don't know what my watts per kilogram is. What are you talking
Right.
about?" You're like, "I know my watts per kilogram 4 decimals out. Do you know?"
I
Yeah,
keep track of
and-
it daily.
In Zwift, you're gonna die. In Zwift, you're gonna die for that hole that isn't there. And in real life, you'll die for that hole once.
Exactly. That's true. That's true. All right. So a little bit on the horizon. Looks like we've got, after this really strenuous week of workouts, we've got a little bit of a recovery week. We have some mixed pedaling drills, a little short punchy VO2 workout that I just recently tested out outdoors. Also great workout. And then we've got a nice long TT effort, 12 minutes on 4 minutes rest times 3. So just a quick reminder to check out the Endurance Lab forum at www.discuss.endurancelab.fit. For those that are new to the podcast or new to the Endurance Lab, there are a lot of sections that are public as well as ones that are just for the lab riders. So check it out. There's a lot of great information there. So a lot of open topics there. Was there anything else from the coaches here today that we needed to cover?
No, I think everyone's been doing fantastic work. It's been a pretty good week to watch. I know there's some shattered legs out there, mine included to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone's been killing it. I'm pretty impressed with what they're doing.
Yeah, the one thing with our short builds where it's 2 weeks on, 1 week off, it allows the 2 weeks on to be quite intense. So this is definitely a little bit of a change up. And I think it's allowing riders to really get a high intense 2 weeks because they know they have this rest week like we have coming up next.
And embrace that rest week. Take that opportunity to really nourish your body and your mind. It's a break that you take for both. We still have some work built in here. It's not a week off the bike, but really take advantage of that to come back fresh and hungry for the following week.
Yeah, a nice, easy 700 TSS rest.
There you go. As Andrea would say, make sure you respect your body. So, all right. Well, thank you for joining us today here in the Coach's Corner. Like I said, if it's your first time listening and would like to hear more content from the Endurance Lab, head over to your favorite podcast app and search the Endurance Lab, or head to YouTube and search the same and click subscribe. For more information on when the next lab is, head over to endurancelab.fit to learn where you can join us to train smart, learn more, and get results.
Thank you.